Ge ga yo ge ga na ga ge ku inu anu ga ahumanu ga hale pule iu ga o Wailuku I lalo iho ka halawai ma kahi o kahe kili o pi iladi I ga malu o hai ku kui mana ko a me ko he ma kana o ka hale I ga o nua ka hua kahi pai a kahi pai I hea ka hale pule o ka ahumanu
Ia no mako.
O mako anai na ka hale pule o ka ahumanu Ia no mako. He mai, hele mai O mako anai na ka hale pule o ka ahumanu. We'll share a little bit of Ka'ahumanu Church history. And we'll start with that kahea or that ole as we entered. Kahea hale pule o Ka'ahumanu. As I shared last week, was written a few years ago with the help of Kalele Kikawoha Schultz, who especially helped with the translation. And it announces whenever we as Ka'ahumanu Church gather, e kahea o ke kanaka a ke akua, translates a kahea or a call from the people of God. He inoa no Ka'ahumanu kahale pule. Ka'ahumanu is the name of the church that is named after Queen Ka'ahumanu. Iu ka o Wailuku I lalo iho o ka halawai o ka moku o kama, moku akama. Upon the sacred lands of Kahikili o Pi'ilani, the grounds that the church sits upon was once the complex of King Kahikili, the last ruling chief of Maui prior to the unification of all the islands by Kamehameha the Great. I ka malu o hai kukui manako a me ko, surrounded by the monkey pod, which sits out on our front lawn, the kukui tree in the parking lot, a mango, and the ko trees. He makana o kahale I ka honua. A gift of the kahale family was the land that was given to the church. Kahu a kahipai a kahipai. Many have been the kahu or the caretakers. If you look at your bulletins in the back, you'll see a list of all the pastors that have served this halepuleo, this church. But we also have the many kupuna who have been here over the years and have kept the doors open so that we might be able to come here to praise and worship Kiakua. Ihea ka halepuleo Ka'ahumanu. Where is Ka'ahumanu Church? And the response from the congregation, or the pane, Eia no mako, we are here. O mako anaina ka halepule o Ka'ahumanu. We gather here at Ka'ahumanu Church. Where is the congregation of Ka'ahumanu Church? Eia no mako. Once again, we respond, we are here. And part of our history, Ka'ahumanu Church here in Wailuku, Maui, was again once built upon what was a portion of the royal compound of Kahikili. The church is said to have been built upon and with the pohaku or the stones from a heiau of that compound. The compound stretched from here upon High Street, maybe even a little further, Makai of High Street, all the way up to what is Bailey House. So that is where we have the connection with Bailey House, because we all are built upon the same lands, and we have a connection with Edward Bailey. Kahikili, again, for short, Kane Kahikili, after the Hawaiian god of thunder, because Kane Kahikili was believed to be black on one side, not believed, it was tattooed. So when you see those gentlemen that tattoo their face over on one side is representation of their warrior roots. He was born around 1730. Actually, what I found online, it said he was born up in Haili. And it goes on to tell all his connections. His sister was Kalola. There is a theory that he was also the biological father of Kamehameha I. His kingdom encompassed 7 of the Hawaiian islands except for the island of Hawaii. And that kind of paved the way for Kamehameha to unite all the islands. The missionaries, upon arriving in the islands, American missionaries usually held religious services out in the open. This was later superseded or changed by the building of thatched grass halles and then lumber-built structures, sometimes imported from New England. The utilization of local materials became more and more in use. And if you look in the back of the bulletin, unfortunately, I haven't gone on to change it, but it still says that the first service in 1832, August of 1832, here at Ka'ahumanu Church, which wasn't known as Ka'ahumanu Church yet, it says it was held in a shed. So, thatched roofs do not make a shed. Okay? But upon visiting a religious service or church service here in Wailuku in 1832 that was led by our first pastor, Jonathan Smith Green, Queen Ka'ahumanu requested that when a more permanent structure be built, it be named after her. Her request was not honored until this building was built and completed in 1876. And this building is the fourth building for this congregation, including that thatched roof. The first building used by Jonathan Green, again, was a thatched roof. The land that it is built upon, again, as the Oli says, was owned by the Kahale family and granted under King Kamehameha III. They gave the property to the church. And although 2 or 3 are gathered and we are small in congregation, in 1834, 2 years after this church was started, there was a ballooning congregation. They had like about 3,000 people come into church. And a second building was built, which was, again, another thatched structure. However, despite the worship numbers, the actual permanent membership of the church was small. 1834 to 1835, the actual membership here at this Halepule, at that time was known as Wailuku Station, was 11 members, even with 3,000 people coming to church every Sunday. Amazing, yeah? So if we think about it, we get maybe a handful of actual members here at the church. So we kind of feel good. We can be just a small members. Bring the 3,000 back. It'll work. And then during the Great Revival between 1837 and 1840, the church membership ballooned to 487. If we had that much, we couldn't fit them inside here. So the previous building was a little bit more big than this. Yeah. Reverend William Patterson Alexander was installed at the church in 1857 after Pastor Reverend Daniel Conde was not liked by the congregation. So not all the pastors that served here were liked. It happens for whatever reason. The Reverend Alexander noted that a new church was needed and advocated building a new one as early as 1866. It wasn't until 1872 that fundraising efforts were undertaken by the Reverend William Pulepule Kahale, the first native Hawaiian pastor in this church, to build a new structure. And the William Kahale is buried out here in the Kahale Cemetery, so we can go visit him and talk story. This particular building was designed and built by Edward Bailey, and he was one of the most accomplished of the Hawaiian missionaries during that period. He was an artist, he was a farmer, he was a teacher. He worked at the Wailuku Female Seminary in Maui from 1840 until its closure in 1849. That seminary is the Bailey House. Okay. After the seminary closed, he helped build the still standing structure of Ka'ahumanu Church, which is this building. Okay. He also began with sugar operations and had a small sugarcane plantation. That small endeavor eventually became part of Wailuku Sugar Company. Bailey's early works were sketches and drawings that were engraved by students at Lahaina Luna Seminary. He also taught at Lahaina Luna when he first came to Maui. Again, the current building, the current structure, the fourth on the site, was built in 1876. It was built using the pohaku from the previous structure that are said to have come from a heiau that was built within Kahekili's compound. The current building is also said to have been built upon the site of that heiau. Half of the pohaku used, or the stones used to build this building, came from the previous structure, and the rest of that pohaku, or those stones, were used to build the wall along Front Street that we see in front of the church. So that's how big the previous building was. You know, we only get half of the pohaku here. And speaking of the heiau, it would never happen today. Can you imagine taking stones from a heiau and trying to put up a building, whether it be a church? But now imagine back then in the 1870s, and you imagine our own people, Napo e Kanaka, when being asked by the missionaries who were here at the time, or the pastors and the members who were here, oh, we like build one building, a place of worship where we can worship Kiakua, someplace sacred. I can just imagine the people of the time going, you know what, go build them right over there. That is a sacred place. We've worshipped Akua in that place for a long, long time. You know? So that is the mana that goes into this building, that those pohaku that have been used. William P. Kahale, again, buried on the property in the cemetery next door. Also buried in the cemetery next door, at the Kahale Cemetery, is Bartimaeus Lalana Puaiki. Puaiki was born with birth defects, which rendered him short-statured, visually impaired, partially blind. Later on in life, he became almost completely blind. In the court of King Kamehameha II, he served as a hula dancer and a member of the retinue, the royal court. He was a chanter. Again, he was a dancer. And then he converted to the new faith. And after he converted, he became a Christian. He became known as a blind preacher of Maui, blind Bartimaeus. And he was called Bartimaeus after the biblical Bartimaeus who was healed by Jesus. In 1841, Puaiki became the first native Hawaiian licensed to preach at his small congregation at Honuaula, which is today we know as Wailea and Makena. Okay. As a religious teacher, he was not fully ordained and was more or less under the supervision of another missionary. David Malo was also the celebrated Hawaiian educator and historian, became the second licensed religious teacher in 1843. It would not be until 1849 when James Kekela was ordained as the first native Hawaiian Protestant minister. Also, Thomas Hopu and John Honoli'i. For our missionary churches, our Kalavina churches, our history goes back to Henry Opukaha'ia. And we all call him Henry O. But Hawaiian and church history, this Halepule has its roots in that history. Henry Opukaha'ia died in New England, but 4 other Hawaiian youths came back on the Thaddeus with those first contingent of missionaries. Those 4 also studied in New England. Those 4 also studied with Henry Opukaha'ia. 2 of them, John Honoli'i and Thomas Hopu, are said to be buried somewhere on this property in unmarked graves. A clock that we hear every hour on the hour, and people, it still works. The clock and 3 clock faces are from Seth Thomas Clockworks, and they were brought over in 1884 when they still had to go down to the bottom of South America and come back up around. The clock was donated by the Beatty family at a cost of $1,000. The stone structure at the rear of our building back here, with one opening exists, though its purpose is unknown. It says it's a belfry. It means the bell hung inside there and they would ring the bell. There is an old picture or sketch of the previous building, and in the back you see another small building that would be that right there. The bell, you go up and you can look at the clock. On the side of it, it says Henry N. Hooper. And Henry N. Hooper was a manufacturer and merchant of decorative lighting during the Civil War. He was a Boston politician and a foundry owner, and his firm cast the first life-size bronze statue in the United States. He was an apprentice to Paul Revere in Paul Revere's foundry. A foundry is a place where they cast metal and iron and cast bells. So Hooper is known for his highly prized bells and chimes dating back from 1838. So the bell we have up there has a connection to, well, Henry Hooper did it, but that connection goes back to Paul Revere. But just some of the history of this Halepuli that we choose to come and worship at. And with that, in August 27th, we will be celebrating 185 years here as a congregation. Of course, the building a little bit younger, only built in 1876. So, mahalo everybody.